Tori Hope Petersen, everybody. So, Tori, I'm going to read you a little about Tori, and we're going to have a chat, and you guys will get to ask her questions. She is a former foster youth, letting her ABBA father be known through her stories. Tori is a wife, biological mom, adoptive mom. She's a national speaker, writer, advocate, and Mrs. Universe. She founded Beloved Initiative, a nonprofit where people learn how to become a professional lover of people. A leading voice in child welfare, Tori is a social entrepreneur who has advocated to congressmen and women and White House policy staffers to reform the foster care system. And guess what? You can pre-order Tori's best-selling debut memoir, Fostered, now. That'll be available October 15th. Tori, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
So can we do a quick synopsis of your life, your story, growing up in the foster care system, and how that led you to this moment as an advocate?
Sure. I first went into the foster care system when I was 3 years old, and that was due to a drug bust. I went to the foster care system and didn't want to be there. I wanted to be with my mom. I didn't know that the life that we were living was bad in any way. And one of the foster care's jobs is to reunify families. So it did its job, and I was reunified with my mom just months later. But as I got older, my mom's mental illness got worse. And so I had to re-enter the foster care system when I was an adolescent. And this time I re-entered with my sister, and I thought this is going to be a good thing because I felt like we were escaping the abuse and the chaos that we were in. And in that first home, my sister and I were separated. And it was kind of like I was leaving one chaotic moment to the next. And I went to go live throughout many more foster homes until I emancipated the day I turned 18.
What do you mean by emancipated? You turn 18 and you don't have to be in the system anymore.
Yeah, so there's a myth that says when youth age out of the foster care system, they get kicked out. But that's not true anymore. There's extended foster care in most states. But I chose to leave the foster care system. I felt very burned by the foster care system for many reasons. And when I was in the system, there was a lot of restrictions that made it so that I was very isolated. I couldn't go to my friend's house. I couldn't go to a bonfire that the school was having. I couldn't go to football games.
Is this in
So this
Ohio?
I grew up in Ohio. And this was normal at this time because there was there's this act that's been passed now called the Normalcy Act, and that says that youth who live in the foster care system can have normal experiences that youth who do not live in the foster care system have. Right. But when I was in the foster care system, that act had not passed yet. And so I didn't get to have many friends. I was very isolated. And so I really just wanted to leave the foster care system.
Yeah, and in your story, you were kicked out of a foster home when you were a teenager because you were riding with your friends to school instead of taking the bus. And so, I mean, I have a bunch of questions about that. Is that because the parents had the right to be, your foster parents had the right to be that restrictive, or was that like a state policy?
Yeah, so that was a state policy.
That you had to ride the bus?
I had to ride the bus unless my friend or the person driving me to school, they had to have fingerprints, proof of license and insurance to the county. And a lot of times I would ask, my friends and my friends' parents to do something like that, but they were just not comfortable. They felt like it was really weird. And so then I stopped asking people, and the foster parents, a lot of foster parents go into the foster care system because they want to adopt children. Maybe they can't have children of their own. And when you adopt through infant adoption through an adoption agency, it's a lot of money. It can cost up to $50,000. But if you go into the foster care system to adopt, you're actually paid a stipend, and it's free to adopt. Okay. And so foster care is a great way to adopt, except that usually you're going to get older kids. You can get babies if you foster through the system, but you usually get older kids. And so they were wanting babies, and they thought, this young girl, she's not following the rules, and she's going to risk our foster care license.
I see. And that gets me to another question I have about how easy or difficult it is to be a foster parent. It's hard enough, just the nature of fostering. It's hard enough as it is. And it's even harder when there's state restrictions, like you need to force your kid to ride the bus. You can't even let them ride with friends. That's got to be... Look, this entire conference is oftentimes about the burden of government and how that do-good or feel-good kind of mentality results in this burden that makes it impossible to do anything. This seems like yet another example. And so how do you find good foster parents? And are we doing a good enough job of that in America? And what do you mean? Because you talk about how Christians should be radically hospitable. Explain that, and is that the mentality we need to have a better foster care system?
Yeah, so 50% of foster parents stop being foster parents after the first year of fostering because it's just really hard and there's not enough support around what they're doing. And so I advocate for radical hospitality. And it's not because I'm super good at it, it's because that's what people did for me. They let me into their home, and these were people outside of the foster care system. These were just members of my church and members of my community, my track coach. They let me into their lives and they spoke words of encouragement over me. And there was, my faith is very important to me, and these people, they could have just invited me into their church, but they invited me into their homes, and they showed me the messiness of their lives, and that's what really brought my heart to believe that I could overcome, brought me to believe in the Lord. And so I think, if you're Christian here, I'm speaking to you, and if you're not, that's okay. I still love you, and I'm still speaking to you. But, as Christians, we want people to love Jesus, and we want people to know that they are deeply loved. But we have to do that by living a life that reflects that. So when people look at us by radically letting people in who maybe are on the margins or out on the outskirts, they're like, why are you doing this? And then the only answer, that we can give is because we are so deeply loved and you are so deeply loved, and we're going to live that out.
I mean, I think it's hard for a lot of students here to even imagine what that's like to go from home to home. It's very destabilizing. And how old were you when you were going through this, moving from home to home and having this complete change of environment, not knowing who wanted you? It's got to be tough. And how do you get through that as a kid? I mean, I wrote a book about fortitude, but, and look, I've gone through trauma as a kid, but this is a whole different kind. And what do you tell kids who are going through something tough, and how do you explain to them how you overcame some of these challenges?
I feel like in me, so my mom named me Victoria Hope. And so she always spoke over me, victory and hope. She was like, that's what your name means. And so I think being surrounded by people who speak the truth over us is really important, because then in the foster care system, even through all the adversity, I did have a community around me that spoke truth over me. Sometimes they spoke truth over me in really hard ways that were hard for me to receive, but I received that criticism, and I let criticism be a way that I could grow. So I really think having voices in your life that are going to tell you the truth and taking them seriously can really put you in a place where you can overcome some of the hardest things.
One of the hard things about being a kid is not knowing what is true, because you can hear a lot of voices and it's hard to discern.
Yeah.
Hard for a lot of adults to discern, I've noticed. I'm in politics. I see how people have a hard time discerning different truths that are told to them. People are seeking somebody who can tell them how life is. And my heart goes out to kids who are put in a position where everybody around them is telling them a certain truth that might not be a good truth at all. It might be how bad they are. It might be how they don't deserve to have parents. It might be terrible, and that this kind of thing happens. And overcoming that, I think, is very difficult. And I think your message to kids who might be going through something like that is unbelievably important. That whether your name is Tori Hope or not, your goal is victory and hope. And I think it's the only message that works. Now, when you leave the foster care system, that's also a whole nother story of overcoming adversity. Obviously, we've got to focus attention on the foster care system itself, but what happens when they leave, this statistic blew me away. 3% of foster youth actually graduate from college, and you're part of that 3%. How was your experience with that? What can we do better to maybe increase that number?
Yeah, so I had a track coach who came into my life my sophomore year of high school, and in between my junior and senior year, he said, Tori, I think you can go on to the state track meet, and I think you can win it. And that was crazy, because there were other voices in my life that said you're going to be a statistic. And The statistics of foster care are very saddening. Only 50% go on to graduate high school. 20% of kids who experience the foster care system are instantly homeless the day they turn 18. And so I was hearing all of these statistics, and when he said that, I was like, okay, we're going to try this out, and if it doesn't work out, I'm just going to blame it all on you. And so we became very close during this year, and I started to train with him, and I became pretty good at track, and that year I went on to become a 4-time state champion in track and field, and that's what allowed me to get my full ride.
Wow.
Thank you.
Just like, I'm going to try track, and then within a year, I'm going to be like state champ, no problem.
I'd never even been to state individually. I was competing against the defending state champion, so I was just like, this is very unlikely, but it happened, and that's what allowed me to go to college on a full-ride scholarship. And then in 2018, graduated and became a part of the 3%. But that, like, all that isn't even the best part. The best part is that my track coach ended up welcoming me in, and he said, you are going to be a part of our family. And he's the man who walked me down the aisle at my wedding, and he's who my kids call Grandpa.
That's really nice.
And yeah, when we talk about like how did I get through it, like I had people who were supporting me, and when we are thinking how can we get this number to be bigger, I think that my track coach, what he did is a great example, because he wasn't a certified foster parent, and people think he was a teacher, but he's a factory worker, and he just goes and like coaches track at the end of his day, and he loves the person in front of him. And that's how we break these negative statistics. That's how we change the world. We just reach out to the one, and we love the person in front of us.
It's amazing what, I mean, that's not a small gesture, that's a pretty big gesture to make you part of their family, but people really do have the ability to truly affect someone else's life in a very serious way. We forget what kind of power we have over people, and it's always a question, and this is what the church teaches us, what Christianity teaches us is be that force for good. It's sometimes convenient and easy to be that force for bad, but imagine what kind of good you can do if you're that force for good. I would say the other lesson that I'm hearing from you that maybe is important for kids going through any kind of hard time, whether in the foster care system or whatever else, because hard is hard. It's all relative, right? A good sense of perspective is important about what others are going through. But what you're dealing with at that moment, it feels like your whole world is collapsing in on you. And what I'm hearing from you is you've got to have faith that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. You don't know, it might not be tomorrow, might not be a year from now, it might not even be 5 years from now. But if you keep an open heart, you will find the light. It will present itself, but you better be ready to walk through it. That's what keeping faith really, really is, I think. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to a juvenile detention center for 18 days before I went into the foster care system, and the only thing we were allowed to have in our cell was a Bible. And I remember reading that there was a plan and purpose for my life. And I had no idea what that meant, but I held on to those words, that whatever was happening in the juvenile detention center, what was happening in the foster care system, that wasn't the end of the story, that's not what my identity was. And I do think just, holding on to these little things, these words, these things I read is what just held that hope together for me.
Yeah, and it's understanding the purpose and the reality of suffering, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And maybe we quote some of the same verses in Romans where we glory in our sufferings, because it is the path to hope and building of character. This is an inevitable part of life. Mm-hmm. And you can claim you're a victim, or you can claim that you're a victor. Yep. It's nice to have a name that literally means victor, I guess.
Yeah, I think that in our culture, in our society, it is so easy to believe what is spoken over us, and I think that especially over young people, it is being spoken over that they are victims, and that I think it can almost give us a sense of entitlement as well. And I think that we have to believe in who God says we are, and who He says you are, who He says your friends are, who He says your identity is that you are a victor in Christ Jesus. And I think that when we can hold on when we can not look at the world and our circumstances, but we can look to him who literally dwells within our very being, we can overcome all things.
So we kind of glossed over the fact that you are Mrs. Universe. Okay, so that's a pretty big deal. I don't know much about the pageantry.
Me neither.
I was, it was one of my paths. I tried real hard, didn't work out. Okay, how does that even happen? How do you go? So you're like, I'm going to try this whole track thing, winner. I'm going to try this whole pageantry thing, winner. You're doing pretty well. So how did this happen?
So my husband and I were fostering a sibling group of 3. We have 2 biological children, so we had 5 kids, 3 and under. And
That's
people
really
are like,
cool of you, by the way, to
oh my
pass
gosh.
it on. And
Like, I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say it was cool, but it was like the stupidest thing I've ever done. It was so hard. And I was like in my mom sweats with my mom bun every day. And I was like, I just want to do something fun. I want to do something different. And so the opportunity of pageantry came on the table, and I thought, hey, let's try that. And I'd kind of always judged it, like, oh, that's like superficial. And I was just like, I try not to judge things before I try them. And that's something that the foster care system taught me. Living with I lived in over 12 homes. And so living with so many different people very intimately teaches you that you can't be so judgmental, that people do the things they do for a reason, and usually in their heart, it's for a good reason. And so I was like, I'm going to try this whole pageantry thing. And I would never do it again, but I'm really thankful for the opportunity. I don't believe that, it's a title. I'm the same person that I was before and after, and I think that above all else, I want to be a woman of integrity. And so now I think just this title reminds me of that, because people look to me and say, oh, she's Mrs. Universe, and I just hope that I live up to this title in a way that I'm kind and caring and everything that someone with that kind of title should be.
Yeah. Well, you have a sense of humility about you, which is something sorely lacking, especially people when they gain some sort of fame or title. They lack that humility, and maybe that's because of your Christian faith and upbringing, but I think it's appreciated. We have time for a few questions. Want to do a couple questions with the audience?
Yeah.
We'll start over here.
They're ready.
Hi.
They're awesome.
Hi.
My
They're
name is
motivated.
Meadow Votis. I'm from Sugar Land, Texas. And I wanted to ask you, because I'm actually planning to run for Teen Miss Texas coming soon.
Let's go.
But in the future, I want to go into politics. And I wanted to ask how you used your title, I guess, and how it transferred into your advocacy.
So it's a little tricky because I had my platform and I was doing my advocacy beforehand, and then I continued to do it after Mrs. Universe. And so what I would advise you to do is, like I said, be the same person you are with or without your title. Do your advocacy, change the world, love people well, whether you get that title or not, because that's what really makes you deserving of that title.
That's a great. I like that point. I would say the same thing about politics, by the way. If you have it in your head that you're going to make it to this point, you will start to act accordingly, and people will notice. Much better to do your best 110% in whatever you're doing now, and when the opportunities come, you'll be able to jump through that door.
Yeah.
Hi, Tori. Isabella Galemi. I'm a senior at Texas A&M. As someone who regularly works in the adoption and foster care policy space, your story is especially inspiring and compelling. It's really, really interesting to hear from you. There's a common misconception that foster families are in it for the money. And a lot of times foster families are paid less than $500 a month per foster child. Granted that these kids come with basically nothing but the clothes on their back. How do you say that we go about recruiting more foster families and properly compensating them for taking care of foster children?
Yeah, well, when you're in the foster care realm, the hard thing is that foster parents actually say, the stipend isn't enough. And we have to change our language because kids are listening. And usually the people who say, foster parents are in it for the money is the kids who've went through it and constantly heard, it's not enough. We need to say that it's more than enough, that God provides and he will sustain us, because that's the truth, and kids need to hear that truth. And I think when it comes to supporting families, that's where the church and that's where our communities have to come in so that they stay in it.
We have time for maybe one or two more. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm from Conroe, and my question is for you, Dan. My uncle joined the Marines when COVID hit, and after he graduated, sorry, I'm nervous.
All right.
He was discharged for not taking the vaccine. I wanted your opinion on what you think is going to happen to our military, and how do you think we can help with that?
Great question. I want to do one more for Tori, so I'll answer it quickly. You know, Rob Smith is coming on after this. He's in the military too. We probably have opinions on it. Can we talk about it then? I promise to answer your question on that. I think it's a great question, but I want to do one more for Tori.
Hi. So my family and I have been doing some research into the Western idea of individualism is like messing up the original family unit, and I was curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you know, I think that the family is the foundation of our nation, obviously. But I also believe that there is this Western idea, a traditional idea of family that can really ostracize people, keep people out. And so I think that there is room to think about family differently in the way that we welcome people in, and while also believing that, you know, strong families, strong mothers, strong fathers are very important.
One more. We got one more. There's just too much demand, so I want to get through as many, even though we're out of time. Go ahead.
My name is Summer, and you said it in the description. It said that you were opting for foster care reform, and I wanted to know specifically what you want to reform.
Yeah. If you could make me change one law, what would it be?
Yeah, I would change that there would be more accountability what's placed in the foster care file. So that's what I was talking about in that video that they showed beforehand. So every foster youth has a file, and I really believe that identity, healing begins and ends with identity. Identity is so important, who we believe we are. When we know that there is a purpose and plan for our life, that we are made good, then we can overcome things. But in foster youth's file, what's put in there is the worst things that have ever been done to them, the worst things that they've ever done, and the only thing that's similar to that is a criminal file. And these kids who are so malleable and in so much pain have to walk with that file. And so I think there has to be a lot of reform around what's really placed in that. There needs to be more accountability around what's placed in that and how it follows youth from home to home.
Tori, you're inspirational, and I think we've informed the students on a subject that they're probably not all that familiar with. So thank you so much for being with us today. This has been fantastic. I appreciate you making the trip.
Thank you.
Tori Petersen.